This is On Air with BingX.
And welcome back, everyone, to another one of our AMA sessions. So today we are back with Francisco from Tanssi. Um, Francisco, do you mind giving us a little background about yourself as well as your role in Tanssi and what is actually Tanssi about?
Yeah, for sure. Great to be here. Thanks for having me today. So yeah, as everyone knows already, my name is Francisco. I'm the CEO of Moondance Labs, the development company responsible for building Tanssi. So a little bit about myself. I spent the last several years as part of the core team at Moonbeam, which is basically an EVM chain on Polkadot. So I focus primarily on growth and yeah, developing the ecosystem in the several years that I was there. And it was actually through the process of building out Moonbeam that the idea for Tanssi came to be. We experienced firsthand how difficult it actually was to build a chain, right? There's so much that goes into it. You need to bootstrap a block production set or a validator set. You need to find out how to incentivize them. Then once you kind of launch the chain, you need to maintain it, do like runtime upgrades. And then after kind of at the protocol level, once it's running, you realize, okay, now I need like wallets, I need block explorers, RPC endpoints, indexers, oracles. So there's all these variables that go into kind of building a chain that are just necessary,
Okay.
which ends up resulting in like, I don't know, months to potentially years to develop a chain, right? So once we started to kind of speak to other teams within the ecosystem about this problem, everybody kind of could relate. Then we expanded that to not only Polkadot, but like Cosmos and Avalanche. And we spoke to a bunch of teams there, and everybody could relate to the things that we had gone through, right? So that's really when we said, okay, like we need to build out something that will make the deployment process for blockchains or app chains a lot easier. And that's really when we decided to build Tanssi, which essentially is an app chain infrastructure protocol that makes it significantly easier for developers to launch their own chains.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds amazing. So I want to dig deeper when you mention like the deployment process. Like, what is currently Tanssi working on, on its role to revolutionizing this process, especially in the context of app chains?
Yeah, sure. So it kind of goes back to what I said initially, right? That like when you build a chain, there's so many responsibilities that the team kind of incurs, right? When you deploy smart contracts on something like Moonbeam or Ethereum, you already have a bunch of tools that are readily available for the developer, right? You might have like Etherscan, Chainlink, you have RPC endpoints, you have kind of MetaMask already available. But when you build your own chain, you kind of take on the responsibility of putting all those things in place, right? And that takes time. It just takes time, energy, resources. And that's really kind of the main friction points that we saw with chain deployments. And despite all of these friction points, the app chain space in general has grown significantly in the past couple of years. So we really saw a unique opportunity there to ease the burden of the deployment process on the developer. So Tanssi itself is a chain, but it's a chain to kind of deploy other chains. So the block production nodes of Tanssi, or the sequencers as they're better known in the Ethereum world, they're shared and decentralized, right? So let's say that Tansi's chain will have 100 block production nodes or sequencers. A subset of those sequencers will actually produce blocks on behalf of these app chains that deploy through Tanssi. So it's kind of providing like an execution environment for these app chains so that they don't have to kind of worry about bootstrapping their own nodes, which is a pain in the ass, right? You have to like evaluate their performance. You have to find out how to incentivize these like block production nodes or sequencers. So Tanssi kind of abstracts away these like infrastructural components so that you have all these tools like out of the box in a fully permissionless way, and the developer can just focus on building their application, right? Which is what they want to do to begin with. They don't want to have to deal with all these like infrastructure pieces that are required to launch a chain. It's kind of similar to what happened in Web 2, right? Where initially like everybody was running their own infrastructure out of necessity, and it was just like a bunch of operational overhead, technical know-how that you needed. And then AWS came along in the cloud, and it just made running infrastructure a lot more convenient and easy, right? So this is kind of the transition that's happening today in Web3. And Tanssi, I would say, is kind of at the forefront of this evolution right now.
Got it. All right, let's take a step back here. Like, for those who don't already know, could you please briefly explain what are app chains?
Yeah, for sure. So, app chains, I would say it's kind of the opposite of deploying smart contracts, right? When you deploy smart contracts on Ethereum or Moonbeam, you're essentially sharing block space with all other projects that are deploying contracts within that shared EVM environment, right? And that has its own advantages. But app chains is basically, instead of sharing all that block space with other projects, you have like your own dedicated chain. So you have your own dedicated and sovereign block space just for yourself. And this, I mean, leads to a bunch of benefits, right? There's a lot more control and customization that the team has when they're building their own chain. So you can actually like personalize the chain to adapt itself specifically for the application that you're building. That in turn could lead to a much better user experience, right? Because you can modify certain aspects of the chain that the user is it's more convenient for the user. Gaming is a good example, right? Where a lot of on-chain games that have a lot of on-chain components, that can be very tolling on block space. So if the network gets congested, gas prices spike, then the end user is the one that it can become almost like prohibitively expensive to play the game, right? So by having dedicated block space, you can keep that under control. That's just one example. I won't get into too many others, but another big advantage is sovereignty, right? Like having your own governance and sovereignty of your own chain. I know a lot of teams that, for example, I don't know, a governance decision happens in like a shared EVM environment or a shared EVM chain that could perhaps like affect your team negatively, right? Because it's a governance decision that affects the entire network. So some teams are attracted by the prospect of having their own chain, having their own sovereignty, and having their own governance mechanism. The value capture and the economics around app chains is also attractive to teams, right? Utilizing their token for paying for gas or having for governance or staking. So it just gives more utility to the token as well. So yeah, these are kind of the reasons that we're seeing is driving the growth behind app chains.
Interesting. So I'm gonna ask like a different side of the spectrum. So in your view, what are the key benefits that Tanssi brings into the broader Sama ecosystem, like including the current parachains?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, we've always been big believers in Polkadot. That's honestly why. I mean, a lot of the founding team at Tanssi, we were previously on the core team of Moonbeam. We've always believed in Polkadot because of this like multi-chain thesis, right? That there wasn't just going to be one chain that did it all. That there were going to be many chains in the future that were each specialized and that had the ability to communicate with each other. I think nowadays it's very obvious, that thesis, but back in the day it was kind of a little bit crazy. But we kind of suspected that's where things were heading. So that's why we decided to build on Polkadot. But then we realized that one thing is the technology that Polkadot kind of proposes, which is extremely powerful and quite advanced. But another thing is the developer experience, right? Like how easy is it actually to like use the technology? And that's where we saw, from having kind of built out Moonbeam, like it really isn't that easy to use, right? It's quite complex. There's a lot of educational barriers to learn how to use Substrate. There's friction points. There's a lot of things that the developer has to take on the responsibility themselves. So in our opinion, that was ultimately leading to like slower growth, right? And this is actually why we built Tanssi, because we want to accelerate adoption within the ecosystem. And by the way, these are issues that are not only specific to Polkadot, but I mean, app chain deployments in general traditionally have been very challenging, right? So we're solving problems that I think any developer can benefit from beyond like the Polkadot ecosystem.
Got it. Interesting. And it seems to me that one of your solution is the Tansi's container chains. So it seems to simplify the deployment process significantly. But can you walk us through how does this actually work and what are their advantages in comparison to other deployment methods?
Yeah. Container chains is kind of a term that we branded ourselves for app chains that are deployed through the Tanssi protocol. So
Okay.
if you think about it, it's kind of analogous to, this is how we got the term, is it's kind of like Docker containers in Web 2. So you have this application that you kind of containerize via Docker, and under the hood, it's being orchestrated by something like Kubernetes. Tanssi is kind of similar in that regard, right? You're kind of containerizing your application logic, and then under the hood, Tansi's chain or protocol is orchestrating all the infrastructure that is required to run your own chain. So I think it goes back to this model that I was mentioning before, where we're going to head into a space where developers will no longer have to be responsible for like the underlying infrastructure that runs their chains, right? It's just a lot more convenient to to use something like Tanssi because it saves you time, energy, resources, and then you can just focus your time and resources on building your actual application. So that's really kind of the term container chains. It's kind of an app chain that is deployed through Tanssi, and thereby it's getting all the infrastructure under the hood, all the tooling, right? Like wallets, explorers, indexers, oracles, RPC endpoints. We're not developing those things ourselves, all this complementary tooling, but we're working with providers so that those tools are kind of included in the developer experience of Tanssi, so that when you kind of launch the chain, you get to pick, okay, these are the tools I want, these are the tools I don't want, and you get those things out of the box. So, I mean, the overarching goal is really to reduce the time to market as much as possible, so that if it took 6 months before, with Tanssi, it takes like, I don't know, a couple of hours to launch like a fully equipped app chain that doesn't compromise on decentralization and security.
Sounds good. And another thing, we also know that you guys have the Tanssi testnet, also known as Dancebox. Could you please elaborate a little about that? And how have you guys seen like such substantial growth over the past few months? Like over 40 projects onboarded. Like what factors have contributed to this, growth? And as well as like which industry specifically do these projects represent?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we launched Dancebox, the Tanssi testnet, a month ago at this point. Before launching Dancebox, we had launched this like builders program called the Appchain Pioneers program. This was really just meant to start engaging with teams that wanted to build an app chain, but that were kind of previously constrained by all these like barriers of entry. So we got like 40 teams that were interested in applying to that, which was great. And then when we launched Dancebox, it's public, so anybody can come and like try to deploy. We received like over 80 registrations from teams that wanted to like deploy an app chain, right? And many of them weren't even in the original Appchain Pioneers program. So for us, this was kind of an exciting thing, right? Because we were getting like organic and inbound leads that, it seems like our original thesis of trying to lower the barriers of entry as much as possible into the app chain space, we're starting to see that it's striking a chord with developers, right? There's a demand for app chains, but there was probably an unaddressed like demand that couldn't be met because of the friction points that can now be kind of tapped through Tanssi. So in general, we're seeing a lot of even smart contract developers that want to have their own chain. Now it's accessible, right? Now they can launch their own chain with Tanssi. They can launch like an EVM chain, for example, deploy their smart contracts and have like a sovereign environment to operate in. And we've been starting to see like hybrid models, right? Where it's not necessarily mutually exclusive to have smart contracts on something like Moonbeam or Ethereum and then an app chain or container chain through Tanssi. We're starting to see scenarios where teams might want to leverage specific kind of infrastructure on ecosystems like Ethereum or Moonbeam, but then offload specific like compute logic from their application into a container chain on Tanssi that could perhaps be block space demanding, but they're still kind of getting the best of both worlds of smart contract environments and like container chains, right? So I think we're heading into this space where you'll be able to kind of containerize any logic within your application that requires like block space, right? Dedicated block space in like a highly secure and decentralized environment. In terms of the industries, I mean, we're seeing deployments all over the place. Like DeFi is a big one, gaming, NFT projects, real world assets, kind of tokenizing on the chain. What else? SocialFi, decentralized identity. So honestly, we're seeing kind of deployments across all verticals within the space.
Interesting. And another question that I have is that could you please briefly explain like how does Tanssi leverages the Polkadot relay chain shared security and interoperability to enhance the security of container chains?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and this is why we're like fans of the architecture that Polkadot provides, right? Security is obviously arguably the most important component when you're building your chain. I mean, if you build a chain, you're responsible for the security of your chain, right? In ecosystems outside of Polkadot, you have to bootstrap a validator set, or this is also why rollups are popular, right? You're just kind of leveraging the security of Ethereum mainnet. With Polkadot, we like the shared security model in Polkadot because what I see with rollups is they're very popular. They're aligned with Ethereum. There's like a big narrative around rollups as a service right now, but the main issue we see there is the degree of centralization that rollups have, right? You have only one sequencer that is responsible for kind of relaying all transactions to be settled on Ethereum mainnet. And for us, that's that's not ideal. We don't want to compromise on decentralization and security. So the Polkadot relay chain is a very high grade security environment. There's, I think, a couple of $1 billion in staked value. There's over 400 validators. So it's a very decentralized and secure environment. So Tanssi itself is a chain that is attached to the relay chain. So it benefits from the shared security model of Polkadot. But then these or container chains that are deploying through Tanssi, they will also be attached to the relay chain, right? So they'll be benefiting from this shared security that the relay chain has to offer. And Tanssi kind of comes in from the side and produces blocks on behalf of all these chains. So getting like shared security out of the box, I think is beneficial for all these teams, so that they don't have to worry about it themselves. And then interoperability is another problem, right? Like with having an app chain, one of the biggest benefits of deploying smart contracts in Ethereum's EVM is that you have like native composability with all other contracts within that EVM. When you have an app chain, you have this problem. How do I connect to like the external space? How do I connect to Ethereum? How do I connect to any other chain? With Polkadot and Tanssi, container chains are going to be able to get a connection directly back to Moonbeam through XCM. XCM is kind of this native cross-chain communication language for parachains within Polkadot. And by connecting to Moonbeam, you'll have access to Moonbeam routed liquidity, which is basically being able to access, Wormhole, Axelar, Layer 0, all these more prominent bridges. So it's essentially giving bridging and cross-chain messaging out of the box for all container chains that launch through Tanssi right away, right? So that's a pretty powerful concept. Teams don't no longer have to either build their own bridge or try to get like one of these bigger bridges to integrate, because it's not that easy to get these like more prominent bridges to have a direct integration with your chain. So yeah, that's kind of the concept, and it kind of solves a lot of these complementary issues that we see with app chain deployments.
Interesting. So in terms of container chains, like what do you, in your opinion, what types of projects or teams would benefit the most from using this? And how can they connect with Tanssi to get started? Because it sounds like an absolute deal, right?
So in terms of Tanssi container chains, what teams would benefit the most? I think teams that require like a higher degree of customization than what a shared EVM environment offer. That's always a great use case. If your application kind of is tolling on block space, that's also a great use case. So as I mentioned before, on-chain gaming. I've seen a lot of games that like it just becomes prohibitively expensive for users to play if like the gas prices start to go up. And I think in the next cycle of the market, that's going to become an increasingly important issue. So that's also a great scenario to have kind of dedicated and sovereign block space through a container chain. If you want to try to offer a better UX, right, to like vertically integrate all the layers of the tech stack or the chain to kind of streamline the UX for your user. If you want to give more utility to your token, utilize it for like gas payments on the chain, or if you have a lot of importance in like sovereign governance, right? If you want to have like for games, this is valid. Like you can have kind of governance for in-game decisions. Okay, you need to modify like the power, the strength of this sword or armor, and you give more kind of empowerment to your players. And then at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. I think there's this kind of erroneous conception or concept that like it's either app chain or smart contracts. And like we're going to start to see these more hybrid models, right? Because smart contracts are great for certain use cases and app chains are great for other types of use cases. So there's already like tangible examples of teams that are working with Tanssi where it's like games that want to like access the NFT infrastructure on Moonbeam or Ethereum, like NFT marketplaces, but then they're offloading the game logic to a Tanssi container chain, and then connecting both via XCM or one of these like GMP protocols. So yeah, I would say that we're going to start as it becomes easier to deploy kind of container chains, we're going to start to see more and more of these hybrid models.
Got it. And so we know one of your goals is to reduce the time required for app chain deployment from months to, under an hour. But can you outline the key features and tools that enable such rapid deployment?
Yeah, I think it comes down to like packaging all the necessary components that are necessary for deploying a chain, right? The first one is like security, as I mentioned before. How are you going to secure the chain? So you plug into the relay chain. Execution. Okay, now I need to now I'm responsible for producing blocks like to be finalized on the relay chain. How do I do that? So that's what Tanssi provides, right? We provide a shared sequencer set or a shared and decentralized block production set that will produce blocks on behalf of your chain. Data availability is provided by the relay chain, and we're also going to be providing kind of a data retrievability service where at any point these sequencers or collators, when they rotate into your chain to produce a block, they can fetch like the latest state of your chain through these like data retriever nodes so that they can effectively manage state transitions. I would say that that's kind of at a protocol level. And then at a higher level, you have all these things that we talked about, right? Bridging, wallets, RPC endpoints, block explorers. So all of these things that you'll regardless need, like you 100% will need that when running a chain, right? So there we kind of include that in the Tanssi developer experience so that developers have all these things that they need. So kind of packaging all of those things together in one experience allows developers to just launch the chain with everything they need, and then they can in 1 hour have all this stuff and then continue to build their application. What I would say is the challenge is providing all of these things in a permissionless environment, right? That's really the catch with Tanssi, because what I'm starting to see a lot is like appchains as a service, rollups as a service, but like you're essentially paying like a development shop or a development agency to build all this stuff on your behalf. But that always, like, the more off-chain components there are, that tends to like drive up the cost. It tends to drive up like the time to market, so it takes longer. This is why I think that Tanssi is unique, right? Because we're building a fully permissionless protocol where anybody can come and deploy. It's fully automated. It's self-service. So by implementing it as a protocol, it makes things a lot more efficient for developers, right? It makes things more cost efficient. It makes it much quicker to deploy, and it's fully decentralized. So these are values that were important to us when we were starting out the process of Tanssi.
Amazing. So how can these developers get started? So how can they, connect with Tanssi, access the Dancebox testnet, and also join the Tanssi ecosystem?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if anybody wants to get engaged, you can try to deploy an app chain on Dancebox. I think the link is apps.tanssi.network. You can submit a token request, and then we'll send it over to you so you can deploy your app chain. I mean, you can connect with us on Twitter, Discord, Telegram. I mean, we're still an early stage project, so we're very engaged and responsive when it comes to anybody who wants to try out the platform. So yeah, if you're curious, if you just want to try it out, just reach out to us, and we'll set up like a Telegram group to show support to the team. Yeah.
All right. And that's pretty much the questions that we have for today. Thank you so much, Francisco, for joining us. And if you haven't checked out Tanssi already, do check them out and stay tuned for more BingX updates.
All right. Thank you so much, Natalie. It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.